Here to do the Rise Above group coaching session as scheduled. Every week, we're going to be here in this space, unless there's some kind of uh, thing that crops up that I'm unable to avoid, some kind of unavoidable issue like a judge that sets a court date or something like that. I am an attorney by trade, so I practice preventive law for growth stage companies and startups. I do a bit of dispute resolution as well, but mostly my job is to prevent people's legal risks from becoming legal problems. I also am a resilient leadership coach. I've written a couple of books. How to Structure Your Business for Success was my first book back in 2020. It's available on Amazon and elsewhere. And it's all kind of an 85-page crash course in startup law. So for entrepreneurs, I wrote it when I was supporting the Boots to Business program at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was teaching retiring soldiers, the basics of entrepreneurship law as they went through the Boots to Business program there. Taught a couple thousand veteran entrepreneurs through that program, and it was really good. But a lot of the materials that the SBA had prepared were not legally accurate. So I ended up writing the first version of How to Structure Your Business for Success to correct that and to provide accurate resources to our servicemen. And then, of course, just kept updating it and building onto it. And now it probably needs another update because there have been some regulatory changes and some other things that leave the book a little outdated feeling to me, although it's probably still very useful for its intended audience. And then I just wrote my second book, which is due out at the end of this month, at the end of February 2024. It's called Lead Again, A Modern Guide to Resilience. And that's going to form the meat that's going to form the basis, the foundation of this live stream and most of these sessions, most of the Rise Above group coaching sessions. Oh, sorry, I just got a little notification that I'm not yet live on Instagram. Trying to restream this out to as many platforms as possible just to make sure people can catch it. You can catch this stream every week on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's it. YouTube. It's also on YouTube. So, tune in if you can live and enjoy that. 10:30 a.m. Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Sorry, Pacific. Until noon Central Time. So it goes about 90 minutes. And the best way for you to participate is actually through LinkedIn. If you join the event, if you signed up to attend the event on LinkedIn, which I gotta refresh the page here on LinkedIn and see if it's live there. But the best way to join on LinkedIn is to go ahead and join the event there, and then you can just type into the chat there any questions or comments that you might have. You can do a little bit of networking. You can see all the other people who've signed up to attend, and you can message them. So that's pretty cool. At least I think you can. I can. So, but there's a networking component to this. You can definitely ask questions and get them answered in the chat. And so that's cool. We want to make this an interactive thing. It is a group coaching session. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can send it to me in a direct message or by email. So if you want to just email me or direct message me your question, you can indicate, or probably contextually, I'll just pick up on the fact that you don't want me to divulge any identifying details, So if you want to do it anonymously, that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So send me your questions. I have a feeling that, because I do this kind of during the workday on a Thursday, like Thursday mornings, people may not tune in live. They may just be catching the replay. But you have an opportunity here for free group coaching, and you can ask a resilient leadership question, or you can ask a legal question, and I will make sure whichever type of question you ask, that it is answered here for you in the group coaching session. So today I had prepared to talk a little bit about chapter 6 of my book. The titles have changed. The chapter titles have changed in a revision since I did the first print run of Lead Again. But originally this chapter was titled Have Some Self-Respect, and the subtitle was Stop Hugging the Cactus. I think about some people as cacti people and some people as scorpions, because there are relationships in our lives, in every person's life, that can be challenging. And so it might be a friend, a family member, it might be a significant other. But these relationships can be emotionally fraught. They can make us feel hurt. They can make us feel frustrated or angry. And, that stings, right? Sometimes it stings because you're close to the person. You're close enough to the person and their defense mechanisms that it just hurts. The way they naturally defend themselves against everyone and everything indiscriminately ends up hurting you, right? Sometimes it feels more directed, like they are so the indiscriminate kind of defense where they're just that way. They're just prickly people, because they've been hurt, they've been through trauma, whatever. It's not directed at you, but a lot of times we take it personally, and that can make it hard to lead. So if you've got a prickly person on your team, a prickly person in your life, it can make self leadership hard when you're around that person. It can make leading them on a team difficult. It just makes everything harder when that person is prickly. That does not make them a bad person. It does not make them a villain. It does not make them a narcissist or whatever kind of off the shelf pseudo psychological mumbo jumbo you've read on YouTube, or I mean on Google or whatever on the internet, right? Like, we need to stop psychologically diagnosing people in our lives because that's not healthy. And I have to remind people a lot that, they'll come to me and they'll be like, this person is so difficult. I think they're a narcissist, or I think they have borderline personality disorder, or I think they have this or that thing. And I said to them, look, you're not a psychologist. You're not a psychiatrist. Even if you had a bachelor's degree in psychology, that wouldn't qualify you in any way to psychologically diagnose another person. You have to go to medical school, right? You have to, or to be a psychiatrist, you have to get a master's degree. You have to, be a clinical psychologist in order to diagnose another person with a psychological condition. And here's another layer. Even if you were a psychiatrist, like full on medical school psychiatrist, right? And you had an intimate, close relationship, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a spouse, a child, or even a really close, like best friend or a close friend, um, you would not be able to diagnose that person because the nature of your relationship to them would leave you so biased that you would be unable to maintain a professional and clinical level of objectivity necessary to diagnose them. So, no matter who the person is in your life, you are not qualified and you are not capable of diagnosing them. If there is something psychologically wrong with them, they need a proper diagnosis from a professional that's not you. So, we need to stop doing this to people, because when you engage in sort of layperson psychoanalysis, what you're really doing is building up walls. You're building up barriers that's unhealthy between you and the other person. You are labeling that person. It's like you reached into your drawer and you grabbed a bunch of sticky notes, right? And you wrote borderline personality disorder, and you peeled off the sticky note and you just stuck it stuck it on that person. Virtual background got me, right? You write borderline personality disorder, stick; narcissism, stick; depression, stick; suicidal, stick; schizophrenic, stick; bipolar, whatever, over and over, right? All these labels. And it's lazy, because what you're doing is you're putting all these labels and tags and categories on this other person as if they were, a social media post that you could just cover in hashtags. And then when you interact with that person, all you're doing is interacting with the labels that you have put on them. You're not really seeing the person. You certainly are not seeing them in a way that's compassionate, that's caring, that's loving. What you're doing is so amazingly selfish because it's all about your perspective and the way you have judged them and labeled them is really not healthy. And people who have a hard time, people who have issues with symptoms of depression, often it's contextual. It's not in every aspect of their life all the time. It's they're depressed about a certain part of their life, right? It's not universal. It's not clinical. They don't have a chemical imbalance in their brain. It's just they're dealing with a certain hard thing, and it might be work, it might be family, it might be their social life, it might be some part of their experience of existence that brings them down. But then, if you change the context, if you change their environment, you change the variables, then their whole mindset and disposition and attitude changes. There are some people who escape into video games or escape into their work. They're workaholics, or they escape into social things like sports or fishing or hunting or chasing girls or chasing guys in bars. Whatever, like going out, nightlife, clubbing, dancing. That's what I'm talking about. So in those contexts, those people, if you asked someone, is that person depressed? Are they whatever? They'd be like, no, they seem like they're having the time of their life. They're having a great time. They love their work. They're great at their work. They're such a good coworker. They're so kind. They're so thoughtful of others. But that same person at home, you ask their spouse, oh yeah, they're total narcissist. Night and day different. Does that mean the person is two-faced, hypocritical? Are they pathological? Are they a psychopath or a sociopath because they're just two-faced? No, they're depressed in a certain context of their life because they're depressed about the way that things are in that context of their life, but they're not clinically depressed. They don't have clinical depression. They don't deserve a diagnosis or the label or whatever. What they deserve is some compassion. So I talk in the book, in this chapter, about not hugging the cactus, um, because I want people to realize that there are these two kinds of prickly people, right? And there are some that you need to have reasonable boundaries with, and there are others that you need to show compassion to. And it's very difficult to discern the difference. Um, and that's what this chapter of the book's to help you with. That's what this coaching session is to help you with. So because you're going to encounter these people in every part of your life at some point, and in a leadership context especially, you're going to need to be able to work through that without costing you your job or your sanity, or both, or the other person, right? It's not fair to push the other person out of their job either, just because they may be a difficult to get along with person sometimes or most of the time. There's a great story in the Bible that lots of people have heard. It's a parable, right? So if you are like, yeah, all right. So here's the parable, right? The parable is called the prodigal son, and I think is like this is a story that has so many layers, right? I think this is a story that doesn't get enough play for the right reasons. Like it always seems to be the same context that it's preached in churches. But I'm gonna use this parable to teach you a story or teach you a lesson that you might not have noticed before, or you might not have had presented to your awareness before in church if you've ever heard it preached. Um, the younger son, the father, there's the older son is often overlooked in this story, but the younger son asks his dad for his share of the family wealth. Now that historically that's pretty presumptuous because under the laws of primogeniture, that he may not have had much of an inheritance. Under Jewish law, I mean, obviously you could, which was the paradigm, the context of this story. Sons would inherit not necessarily just by birth order, like the oldest son gets everything, like as in primogeniture, but Certainly, each of the sons in this story was apparently entitled to some inheritance when their father passed, and the younger son asked his dad, "Hey, can I get mine early? I want it while I'm still young enough to go and enjoy it and party and have a good time." And then he immediately took everything he was given, and he didn't invest it. He didn't use it for the family. He didn't use it selflessly, or to go and get married and start a family of his own or anything. No, he went and partied. He took all of his inheritance while his father was still alive, went to the nearest big city and squandered it, just completely wasted it. Meanwhile, his older brother stayed home, took care of the farm and or whatever, the family business. It doesn't say, but he took care of things and stayed with his dad and was, the good son, so to speak. His father felt an enormous amount of emotional pain. Um, this is very much like being pricked by a cactus, right? The son wasn't just selfish towards his father. He wasn't doing anything intentional towards his father. He just didn't care. And he wanted to do what he wanted to do. He was just selfish and he was prickly in that way towards everyone. And his dad felt hurt and upset, but he still loved his son. This is the emotional cactus. For the father, the son is a cactus. There's a mixture of love and pain. There's the promise that inside that cactus there is nourishing, life-giving water that can benefit them. They can benefit, the person who has the relationship with the cactus. And it's just difficult to get to that nourishment because it's covered in prickly spines. Later, when the son comes back in the story, sorry for his actions, his father's happiness overshadows the earlier pain. And it's still there, right? But the story is beautiful because it says that while he was yet afar off, while the younger son was yet afar off, like in the distance, his father saw him and ran to him and embraced him and kissed him. And he brought him home. He put a robe on him and he killed the fatted calf and had a feast. And he celebrated. The older son was bitter about this, and his dad said, "Hey, your brother was dead. He was dead. Now he's alive again. Celebrate. Everything I have is yours. Everything I have now, like we still are doing pretty good. Yeah, he got his inheritance. We're still doing pretty good. He's already got his inheritance. He received it now, right? He's not going to get anything from me ever again," was implicit, right? But I am overjoyed because I love him, and you should love him too, and you should come and celebrate with us. Forgiveness, eagerness to forgive, right? When that's how we deal with cacti people, that's how we deal with scorpion people. Of course, in order to really fully forgive and restore a relationship, the person has to come back humbled, contrite, right? They have to seek the forgiveness, just like the prodigal son returning home to his father and saying, "Man, I screwed up." In the Bible, in the story, it's the chronology of that story is really important and it's really interesting. The father, before the son could even apologize, the father runs out and grabs him and loves on him and lavishes him with love and forgiveness. He does that, but then the son still apologizes, right? He is contrite. But the father, before the son comes back hat in hand, while he's still afar off, the father runs eager to forgive. He seeks the opportunity to forgive. He goes out and creates the moment. He doesn't wait. He doesn't just sit there, see his son and go, "Yep, I knew it. He's coming back. Yep, he's wasted everything and I knew this day would come, and let's see, let's make him squirm. Let's let him grovel." He didn't do that. He ran out there and grabbed him and loved on him. And of course, the son did apologize and he was contrite and the relationship was able to be restored. And it was as if all the spines had been broken off of the cactus. like they all had been shattered off. And that's when you know you can fully restore your relationship with an emotional cactus, is when they come back to you seeking your forgiveness, contrite and full of humility. Then you can have a nourishing relationship, and you should seek opportunities for that. You should proactively seek opportunities to forgive. The forgiveness won't be possible until there is contrition, until the person is penitent, until they are sorry and they are humble about it, right? Then forgiveness can happen, reconciliation can happen. But until then, you should just be like the father of the prodigal son, eagerly waiting for it, rushing towards the ability to reconcile with that person when the opportunity presents itself. I mean, he was out there, you imagine he was out there probably every day looking for that son to come back. He wasn't just, it wasn't just a coincidence, I don't think. I think he was out there looking for him to return every day, hoping that he would. But he also didn't go into the city and go looking for his son either. He didn't chase him down. He stayed right where he was and waited for him to humbly and with contrition return. So it is difficult. And while the cactus person is yet prodigal, while they are still being hurtful, while they still have all of their spines and none of those have been broken off of them, they haven't been humbled. What can you do? How should you deal with this person? Um, and how can you stop hugging them? Because how much more would it have hurt if the father had ran into the town, into the city after the prodigal son, and tried to force himself on that son, right? The rejection, the sting of rejection, would have been so much more. It would have hurt him so much more. He needed a bit of a boundary. He needed a healthy boundary, a healthy space. The first thing to do, I think, if you're going to deal with a cactus person to end the embrace, is to first identify that person in your life. um, Look at the challenging relationships, the emotionally disruptive attachments. Because, by the way, the cacti in your life aren't always people. They are always relationships, but they're not always people. We have relationships to ideas, to our own self identity, to other things, right? So you might be looking at other people and being like, ah, they're the problem. The problem might be you. It might be the cactus might be internal. You might be the cactus. You might be hurting yourself internally. And that could have a lot to do with the way you identify yourself, the way you self identify, or the way you um, have structured your own self image, right? Self respect or lack of self respect. At core, this whole chapter is about self-respect. Are you respecting yourself? If you don't respect yourself, then no one else will respect you either, right? If you don't walk in self-respect, then other people are not going to respect you, and that can make leadership impossible. Because to be a good leader, people need to respect you, and obviously, to get that, you need to respect yourself. So, but it could be disruptive attachments to political views or even religious views, or any form of longing that leads consequently to suffering. Just wanting it and not having it, or wanting the person and not having them, hurts you. Second step is to practice some mindful awareness, bring in some awareness about the cactus. Essentially, this is very simple but very difficult. You have to observe the cactus, whether I'm going to say them, I'm going to, anthropomorphize this a bit because it's just easier to continue in that way, and to imagine it that way. But remember, it could also be other attachments that aren't people. Observe it, allow it, accept it for what it is. Observe that person, allow them to be who they are, accept them how they are. Now, accept does not mean affirm. Acceptance does not mean affirmation. Acceptance and affirmation are not at all the same thing. Affirmation and validation, where you approve something, you give it the stamp of approval, and you say, "This is good. This is good." That is not acceptance. That's not what accept means. Um, you can accept a form that is submitted in your office without approving that form. All you have to do is receive it and not be undone by the receipt of that form, right? So someone might bring you a form to file and you accept it from them. They give it to you, you receive it, you've accepted it. Now, you then have an opportunity to review the form and either approve it or reject it. It doesn't mean that you're approving or rejecting the person that gave it to you. It means that you, whatever it is that they're proposing to you, you don't agree with it. And you can tell them that. Acceptance is simply taking something in without being triggered by taking it in. You take it in, you receive it from the other person, or you receive the other person. You create a space, you hold open a space inside your awareness for them that you allow them to occupy. You let them be there. You accept them. You let them know that they're not completely rejected in their identity and their dignity and in all of that, their value as a human being. You're not making them other. You're not dehumanizing them. You're not just attaching a label to them like a psychological diagnosis or something like that. That's rejection. That's refusal to look at the other person, refusal to see them, refusal to hold any space open for them. That's rejection. And few things hurt more than that. So you should accept the other person and know that you can have an awareness about them, you can observe them without that having to hurt you or trigger you or send you off on a spiral. If the other person has that, just their very, like the very fact of feeling like you have to accept them and be open to them and hold space for them, if that triggers you and sends you off into the spiral, the problem is you. You're the problem because you don't have enough self-awareness and internal security, mental stability, emotional stability. You don't have enough resources yourself to be able to hold space for another person without feeling completely triggered by them and set off. You need to be able to observe them, allow them to exist, and accept them. So that's, like I said, simple but difficult. The third step is to create and to enforce an emotional boundary, creating distance between yourself and the source of your suffering. Now, this is very difficult. And in one of the subsequent chapters of the book, I talk about the difference between a true boundary and a weaponized boundary, a wall, a barrier. One is healthy and the other is not. When I talk about creating boundaries, I'm not talking about building a wall and holding the person at arm's length and telling them, you know, I'm only going to see you at Christmas or Easter or whatever because you are not emotionally safe for me. I don't feel emotionally safe around you or whatever. It's not about that. It's not about walls and barriers and everything in the relationship having to be on your terms. I'm only going to communicate with you by text message or by email or by snail mail or by fax or whatever. I will only talk to you in the context of therapy, a therapy session, right? Those kinds of things where you can't hold space for the other person and you can't have a normal conversation. If that's how bad things have gotten, the problem is with you. Unless that person is an imminent threat of physical harm, or they are just openly, constantly, truly like verbally abusive, where they are making, you know, a concerted, intentional effort to tear you down, to tear down your dignity, your character, to say you're just a bad person. They're swearing at you, they're calling you names, they're flipping you off, they're acting immature and childish and ugly, right? If they're that way to you, then yeah, absolutely, you may need some more uh, intense boundaries. You might need some stronger boundaries. And you might need to tell them until you can have a polite, civil conversation with me, until you can do that, then I'm just not going to stand here and listen to you say all these things to me, right? You can say whatever you want, but you need to put it in an email and send it to me, right? Because I'm not going to just stand here and listen to you berate me and shout at me and and swear at me and be abusive. So in a lot of cases, it's not that though. It's just the other person um, says things that you don't like. That's what it amounts to. So you really shouldn't try to navigate this third step of creating and enforcing emotional boundaries on your own. You shouldn't. In fact, you shouldn't do it with just one other person, I don't think. I think this is where you need a mentor, you also need a spiritual director, a guide. Um, I think you need the advice of a couple of trusted people who have a diverse array of perspectives, a variety of perspectives. And I would say, one person to be kind of the spiritual advisor, one person more of a psychological advisor, that thinks about things very rationally and analytically, and then another person who's taking on sort of the emotional component there as well. And I think having a variety, a chorus of different kinds of voices to advise you about exactly where and how intense the emotional boundary needs to be with somebody like this. I think that is ideal. So, and I think a coach can really help with that. A mentor can really help with that. You shouldn't do it on your own. You should do it very thoughtfully. And these kinds of boundaries should be, in my opinion, in most cases, except the most abusive. Like, and I don't mean just things that you, again, with the psychological labels that you just label abuse to keep from having to really engage with it or think about it. I'm talking about like things that actually are objectively abusive things. And you should not be the sole person to determine whether or not things are abusive. Something isn't abusive just because it feels abusive to you or makes you feel abused. Something is abusive when it is actually causing damage to you, not just upsetting you. Okay, there's a big difference. So be really careful about that. These psychological labels, the word abuse, and all of that is really overdone these days. It's too much, and it diminishes the impact on real victims of abuse for other people to appropriate that label, that moniker for themselves. And it actually, like anyone who actually adopts the label of victim of abuse, they're accepting something that is actually really harmful to them if they aren't um, working towards healing that. Like if you're using the victim label to continue to define yourself for a long period of time because it has come to feel comfortable or it has brought about benefits in your life because other people have sympathy for you when you play the victim, right? That is really, really unhealthy. Do not do that. And it's dishonest. It's dishonest because you no longer really are living in the trauma, right? You're now using the trauma. You're in sort of this meta space where it has become um, both an excuse for not having to work through your issues and a way to get other people to do nice things for you. Playing the victim card is pretty disgusting. Don't do it. It really diminishes the experience too. It takes away from the experience of people who have not only experienced intense trauma, but worked really, really hard to heal through that and be better on the other side of it. Right. I personally have lived through some horrific things, but I mean, stuff that I just wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I don't define myself as a victim. I'm not a victim. At one point, I may have been, but I'm not now. Now, I think of myself more as a person who's overcome it. I don't even like the term survivor because that feels like too attached to the trauma as well, right? Um, I'm a resilient person. I'm a person who has enough mental plasticity and fortitude to adapt to changing circumstances. And even though some things still to this day can bring back all of those feelings, right? There can be times where it feels like you're right up in it again, right? Even in those moments, you're going to get through it. It may not feel like it. It may feel like there have been times where, I'm kind of going back through, I'm feeling like triggered, or things are being brought up for me again. I just get this dead feeling, right? Like you just feel, and it doesn't last very long, but for even a few hours, it might just feel like your authentic experience is that you're just kind of alive, but not really alive, right? Like you're just kind of dead inside. Just this numbness that sucks, right? But even in that moment, if someone that you respect like speaks into your life and kind of challenges you, or asks you questions about those things, um, you know, somewhere inside you, there's still that spark, right? The same spark that you started following to do the work of healing and recovering. And before you know it, that little tiny light is bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're out of it. And you know the way back. No matter how far life knocks you down, right? You know the way back. You've come back before, and so you can come back again however many times it takes. That's what resilience is all about. And good leaders need to know the way back, because the path of leadership is all about, like overcoming challenges, not just in a proactive way, but the ones that you couldn't prepare for, you couldn't avoid, you couldn't prevent. Things happen. Sometimes they happen to you, and you need to recover from it. And a good leader needs to know how to lead their team through that. There are a few more steps in dealing with the emotional cacti people, right? After you create the emotional boundary, and you observe it, you should reevaluate it regularly. These boundaries, again, they should be more like lines on the road, like painted lines on the road. This is the boundary right here. Here's the line in the sand. And you clearly communicate that to the other person. Please don't cross this. I want you there. I want to be here. That's how I feel. And the other person might transgress the boundary, but every time they do, you go to them and you say, hey, listen, I'm not good with this, and I need you to go back to the other side of the boundary, please. And usually in the moment, people will observe that, and they may be like a small child. They may be seeking comfort or connection or something from you, so they may transgress the boundary a lot. And it might not be because they don't respect you. It might not be because they don't love you or they don't care about you. It's just that there is something pulling them inexorably towards you, and they almost can't help themselves. And so you just, like a parent with a child, need to be patient with them and tell them, hey, you're going to have to go over here because the way you are is hurting me. And then you also need to do the work of figuring out why the way they are hurts you. Why can't you be safe to hold space for them the way that they are? Why can't you accept them? Why does that trigger you? Why does that set you off? That's the only reason they're really a cactus to you, after all, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with the way that they are. It has to do with the way you interact. It's not about them or you exclusively. What makes that person a cactus to you, because they may not be that way to everybody, they may not seem that way to everybody, but the way they are, the reason they are a cactus to you is because of the interpersonal dynamic. It's because of who they are and who you are, and why your interaction isn't good for you. Um, the fifth step in dealing with the emotional cactus person is to treat the wound. So that's really what I'm talking about here. That other person just being the way that they are. It's not anything about what they're doing particularly. It's just the way that they are hurts you somehow. Um, you have to treat that wound by restoring emotional safety, and that's not something the other person can do. And it's not something that you ought to expect them to do for you, or do as a precondition towards, for you loving them. Again, remember the story of the prodigal son and the father. The father was hurt by his son, but he looked proactively for an opportunity. He sat there, he probably thought a lot about his son, about how much he loved his son, how much he missed his son, and he sat there and waited for him to come back. I have clients whose spouses are the prodigal son. It's the prodigal wife or the prodigal husband, and they're gone. They've gone off on their own, and that hurts. And lots of people will tell you one of the worst things you can do is chase after them. It's hard not to do that because as the person who's been left, you know, it's natural to want to run after that person and envelop them in your love and heal that and do everything in your power to try to restore that relationship. That's the natural thing to do when you love someone. The prodigal son's father, I'm sure, wanted to chase after his younger son, to go find him in the pig pen where he ended up and pick him up and bring him home. The reason I think he didn't do that was because, for one thing, the father in the story of the prodigal son is God, metaphorically, right? He's meant to represent God. The faithful are the older son, and the sinners, the ones who go their own way and are selfish and live their own life by their own rules, their own interpretation of scripture, their own everything, right? The ones who really just worship themselves and reject God and go off on their own, they're the younger son. And because in the parable, the father is God, he has enough wisdom to do exactly what God does, which is not to chase after us, not to chase after the wayward spouse, the wayward child, right? Um, the cactus person. He doesn't chase. Instead, he allows and he hopes and he loves and he waits. And I think the reason he does that is because unless we are motivated of ourselves, unless the prodigal son, the prodigal wife, the prodigal husband is motivated internally to come back, then it won't stick. Unless we are drawn back to God out of true contrition for our sins, where we want to leave it all behind and come back to a good relationship with Him, unless we want that internally, it won't stick. If God goes and drags us back into His good graces, we'll just run off again, right? If you go and chase after the spouse, they'll just run off again. They have to know that they messed up. They have to suffer in their choices, in their bad choices, and they won't suffer right away, right? The prodigal son didn't suffer right away. He went out and blew his inheritance, had a great time of his life, party, wine, women, all that. Good times. Good times were had by all until the money ran out, right? And then he had nothing to eat, nowhere to go, no one who really loved him because they only loved him for what he brought to the table. Their love was transactional for him. And eventually he ended up in a pig pen eating the slop, the pig slop, right? And he thought, I wish I were dead. I wish I could go back to my father's house. And finally he decided, I'm going to just go back and be contrite and beg him to let me be one of his servants. Like, I will accept anything, a lower station, whatever. And with that humility, his father, it was enough for his father to restore him to his place as his son because he loved him. We should do that too. The father certainly did that. He restored emotional safety for himself. He had the boundary of, I'm not going to chase, right? I'm going to just wait. But he did look and hope and wait for the opportunity to heal that relationship, to restore the relationship, to heal the emotional injury. And he healed it by rushing out to forgive, bringing him back, putting a cloak on him, a ring on his finger, killing the fatted calf, celebrating and encouraging the faithful son, also encouraging others to accept him back with love and with total forgiveness. That's how it works. You have to respond with mindful and intentional care for yourself. You don't want to chase after the other person. You don't want to go after that cactus coworker and smother them in your love. You're just going to get more and more hurt, right? But you should be vigilant about looking for opportunities when they are realizing that the way that they have been really has made it harder for the team. It's made it harder for them. Um, you have to look for ways to say, you know what, uh, I see that you're hurting now, right? And I think if you embrace change as a result, you can still have a place here and you can still be productive here. I think you need to change. I had a professor in law school who did a version of this for me. She said, I came to her and I said, and it was really one of the first things that happened on my journey towards recovery from a lot of trauma that I suffered when I was young. I didn't recognize that as what it was at the time. At the time, I just thought it was a funny anecdotal story and kind of an insight, right? And that's the way I accepted this conversation for a really long time. But in the years that followed, and certainly today, I really understand this contextually as part of a broader pattern of healing, of personal growth and recovery. But I had gone to this professor in law school, and I said, I don't really get along with very many of my classmates. I only have a couple of friends, and most people seem to dislike me. That's hard for me because I don't dislike them. Um, and I said, I just don't know, what's going on or why. I feel out of place. I feel like maybe I even made a mistake coming here. And I said, "Can you help me?" And she said, "Well, how blunt can I be?" I said, "You can be as blunt as you want to be. You can, say whatever you want. I'm a big boy. I can take it," I think was the exact words I used. And she said, "Well, Noel, you're an asshole." And I was like, "Oh, well, could we keep it constructive, please?" And she said, "Well, yeah. I mean, the issue is that you don't just tell people when they're wrong." She goes, "You are clearly very smart, and you focus a lot on being right and having the right answer." She said, "And you shut other people down. You tell them not just that they're wrong, but why they're wrong, why they're stupid for being wrong, and why it's kind of, a character flaw, like why they're a bad person for being so wrong. And you make them feel like crap." She goes, "What if you did that in front of a jury? You're here in law school, you're learning to be a lawyer. What if you did that in front of a jury? You think you'd win your case? Do you think anybody wants to listen to you when you make them feel terrible? And if they won't listen to you, does it matter if you have the right answer? If you have all the right answers in the world, if you're right, but you're unkind, nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear that." And I was just kind of like, wow, okay. And at the time in my immaturity, and I was, even though I went to law school kind of later in life, I think I was like 20, let's see, it was 2009. So I was 27, something like that when I started law school, I think, or I was coming up on 27. Um, Seems like a lifetime ago now, but that was later than a lot of my colleagues, my classmates. My best friend from law school is like 6 years younger than me. So, and he's an extremely mature and wise person that I'm so happy to have in my life. But it was weird kind of being a little bit older guy. There were some other non-traditional students, but they seemed to integrate better than I did, and I was just like, "What is going on?" So I had this conversation, and now I accept that it is more important to be kind than to be right. But at the time, I thought, okay, in my immaturity, I thought, okay, um, it's important to play the social game. I still only heard what she said at that time at a superficial, sort of tactical level, like kind of a strategic level, because it penetrated enough of my outer shell and defenses to make me decide to change some behaviors, but it didn't reach all the way down to my beliefs and values. It didn't penetrate into some of the deeper layers of my mind. That came later, but it definitely was a crack in my armor, a crack in my defenses that I had built up. And when I say defenses, what I mean is really just emotional trauma responses, right? There were just layers and layers and layers of trauma and response to trauma and defense mechanisms that had built up around me and had made me a cactus person for by and large at that point in my life. I was very much a cactus person for a lot of people. Again, contextually, but still. And she was so instrumental in my life. That one conversation was one of the things that I learned in law school that has stuck with me the most. It wasn't a legal lesson. It had legal implications, like, are you gonna be able to win over a jury if everybody sees you as the jerk who knows it all? Like, you have all the right answers and you only care about being right, but you don't care about being kind, and you don't have any compassion, you don't have any sympathy for other people, but you're right. So what? We don't like you. So we're gonna find against you. And juries can do that. A jury doesn't have to follow the law. That's what jury nullification is. Well, yes, he's in the deliberation room, in the jury room, they're in there and they think, well, yeah, that guy's guilty, but you know what? If I were him, I would have done the same thing, right? The movie, the John Grisham book and movie, A Time to Kill, is so great, right? Um, because even if the guy did it, right, the jury might have thought, well, given the circumstances, murder really is the unjustified killing of another with malice aforethought. Was this unjustified? You know, or the illegal. I don't know. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. It's been a while, but I may have parts of that definition wrong. But I think it's unjustified or illegal killing of another person with malice aforethought. But was it unjustified? You know, um, I think a jury can just do what it wants to do most of the time, and who's gonna who's gonna say if they want to acquit, they will acquit. If they want to find you guilty, they'll find a reason to find you guilty. And it sucks that the judicial system, especially in a jury trial, can boil down to a popularity contest. For someone who is very, very principled, for someone who says, well, no, this is what this means, and it's black and white, and you see it in just these very narrow, rigid terms, the idea of a jury, just because they don't like someone or because they really like someone and relate to them, can make the decision on that criteria and not based on following the law. That's kind of abhorrent. And it seems like an egregious violation of justice. That's the way it is. So that's an oversimplification, of course. But as a generalization, that's the way it is. Cactus people are difficult to love, but they're probably not that way because they're bad people. They're probably that way because they're hurt. And hurt people hurt people. It's trite but true. It's cliche. There are other people who are scorpions, and these are people who they may have a psychological diagnosis or they may be in your life and they may be, I don't want to say intentionally hurtful, but they are definitely like reactionary, reflexive people. They're doing what comes naturally to them because that's just the way that they are, whether it's because of neurochemistry or it's because of the way they see the world. It's because of some truly immutable quality, but they are in your life, and there's this other layer that distinguishes them between a cactus makes them a scorpion and not a cactus. And I'll get into what I mean by a scorpion in just a minute with another story, another parable. But they are doing it intentionally. There's some layer of intention. It may just be like an instinctive intention. It may not be a true cognitive, like, I've thought this out, I'm going to do this on purpose kind of intention, but there is an intention in the sting. Let me unpack this a little bit. So it's important to handle the cactus people with care. They can hurt us, and we need to be intentional um, and be mindful about protecting ourselves. But there are some of these other scorpion people um, that we need to keep in our lives, and we need to take a sacrificially loving approach to them. even though they're hurting us and it feels directed. That's another thing. The big difference between the cactus and the scorpion is that the scorpion's sting is directed. It's directed at a particular person that they feel threatened by or whatever, right? It's directed. It's a directed attack. It's not always on, and just sort of ambient, right? It's or ambient or whatever. It's not ambient. It's directed. And sometimes with these people, we need to avoid them, right? Because sometimes the scorpion can kill you, or at least hurt really bad. But sometimes you endure it. You endure the sting. And humans, this is a truly human, but also transcendental and divine kind of thing. Um, and again, this is one of those things like neither the cactus nor the scorpion should be completely encountered and dealt with alone. You need help, you need support, you need a spiritual director, a coach, a mentor, you need a chorus of voices advising you and helping you because you need the outside view and you need perspective and you need guidance. So these voices, these outside people help you to reframe, they help you to stay focused on what you're trying to do, and they keep you from getting drawn in to your feelings. It is important to remember that feeling an emotion, and I mean authentically feeling it, like really being in touch with your emotions, which is something I also wasn't for a long time, you know, feeling that and authentically, genuinely being with the emotion does not mean being in the emotion. Being inside of an emotion, you think about it. If there are two balloons, one balloon's inside the other balloon, which one's bigger? The outer one, of course, right? The outer balloon is bigger because the smaller balloon is inside the bigger balloon. Which one is what other people encounter and deal with? Like, which one is seen as the person? When you're in your feelings, people can't really see you, engage with you in a direct and authentic way because your feelings have grown so big around you that that's all that other people can experience. And you might say, well, it's not that much bigger. I'm like slightly smaller balloon that's been inflated inside a bigger balloon. It, yes, that's all relative, but I mean, it may be more or less intense in the way that you experience it, but it's no less true. You don't want to be in your emotion. I've had people who've come to me for advice over the years, not necessarily clients, but people who talk about being in love. And it always occurs to me, and sometimes I mention it to them. You shouldn't make any decisions while you're in love. You should not get married while you're in love. You should not have an affair or, like you should never have like an illicit extramarital affair, but you should not have like a love affair, a fling or whatever while you're in love with someone because you're in the emotion. It's dominating and controlling you. It's not in you. The love is not in you. You are in the love. You're in love. And it's huge and it's overwhelming and it's overriding your reason. You're not able to think clearly around that person because you're in love with them. And that's dangerous for both you and the other person. Just like if you are so overwhelmed by feelings of anger and frustration and contempt and disdain for another person, you should not make big decisions with respect to that person. You should not end if you hate your husband, you shouldn't divorce your husband. If you feel frustration and contempt and anger all the time around your husband, you should not divorce him because those feelings are not inside you, right? You shouldn't leave your wife. And if you feel in love with another person while you're married, you shouldn't take any action towards that person. You shouldn't leave your spouse. These are I'm using these sort of intense examples just to illustrate if you're inside your feelings, you should not make big decisions with respect to the other people involved. Instead, you need to grow in your own self-awareness and bring the feelings back inside you. I also say this to my son. Right now, you're so overwhelmed. He's 5, right? You're so overwhelmed, like, "I want this, I need this, blah." I'm crying, melting down, throwing a temper tantrum, right? "Ah." And kind of sigh, and I'm just like, "Ugh, he can't hear me. He can't see me. He's not really aware. He's not in this moment in this room. He's not here. The feeling is here, and he's in the feeling, and he's seeing everything through and hearing everything and feeling everything through the lens of these feelings." And so I call in to him. I'm like, "Hello in there, Hey, bud, let's take 3 deep breaths. Let's inhale. Let's fill ourselves back up. Let's focus on our breathing. Let's focus on something other than that feeling, because that brings the energy down out of the feeling, kind of deflates the feeling, and it brings the feeling back inside us." That's why you might need some distance. That's what a boundary is for. Is so that you're not so close to someone that those feelings just rush in and overwhelm you. You have the boundary, just not to push the other person away, not to shove the other person away, not to hurt the other person, not to create a barrier between you and say, "We're done. I'm done. We'll never reconcile. We'll never get back together. We'll never be friends again. You're not, you're dead to me. I don't want to have any kind of relationship with you. You're fired." You're not there to burn bridges and break people and break the connection. That is unhealthy. That is dangerous for you and the other person. That's destructive. That's toxic, whatever label you want to put on it, right? The healthy thing to do is say, "I need to come over here," and to put just enough space between you and the other person that you can pull those feelings back inside you, that the energy, the charge in all of that makes it get really big, filming, comes back down, and you can bring it back inside yourself. There's a story about a monk and a scorpion that comes to mind for me when I'm thinking about people who repeatedly hurt us and intentionally hurt us, even when we're trying to help them. That's been extremely frustrating for me. That's been my life for a long time, like trying to help people, and then them either taking it the wrong way or not being in a place to receive it, or whatever the case may be. Um, but you're trying to help, and they constantly lash out, misinterpret, misconstrue your words, and tell you you're being condescending or judgmental or whatever, and you're not. You're simply observing, "This is the way I see things. This is the way it seems to me that things are. And I think things would be better for you if you would do this." And instead, they lash out and attack, right? That's a scorpion. These two monks were washing their bowls at the river, and they noticed that a scorpion was drowning. And one monk immediately scooped it up and set it on the bank. And in the process, he got stung. The scorpion stung him. And the other monk, I mean, this happened over and over, right? He fell in, and um, the the monk would pick him back up and set him on the bank. He got stung a couple of times, and the other monk said, "Friend, why do you continue to save the scorpion when you know its nature is to sting?" "Because," the monk replied, "to save it is my nature." Saving a scorpion is not clinging thoughtlessly to that which causes suffering, whether it's another person, an attitude, self perception, identity, whatever, right? It's not clinging thoughtlessly to these things or these people that hurt. Saving the scorpion is an intentional and mindful act of sacrificial love, and it's based on care and concern for other people's needs. Or if we're the scorpions, again, sometimes we do these things to ourselves. Negative self-talk, that's scorpion. Um, and so we have care and concern for others' needs or for our needs. The biggest difference, and I've articulated a couple of differences, maybe not super clearly, but you know, The biggest difference, I think, the biggest distinction is whether you're enduring pain for a purpose, or you're just going through a necessary suffering that, if you were to chase after a person, it would just hurt you, and they would still keep running from you. They would still keep lashing out at you. They would still keep hurting you. Like the intimacy itself, because they aren't in a place where they can do the right thing and be a good person. Instead, they're toxic and bitter and hurtful and angry and resentful and abusive and so on, right? That's a cactus. But they're like that to everybody in that context of their life, context of relationships. It wouldn't matter who they were with in that context. They're going to end up being that way because there's something broken in them. There's something wrong with them, and they need to fix that before they need to find humility. They need to find contrition, and they need to realize that um, they're not entitled to anything, right? That we all have to work together, and that God put us in each other's lives for a reason. And that reason is to love each other and to love Him, to reflect His love for all mankind, to firstly into ourselves, back to Him, and to other people as well. So, there were a few questions that kind of cropped up with participants, and that I want to answer around these sorts of issues. And I've taken the liberty of rephrasing some of the questions just to protect the individual people who submitted questions. Um, so one of the questions was, how can I identify a cacti person on my team, and what are the key characteristics to look out for? We've already pretty well covered that. What differentiates a scorpion person from a cacti person in a workplace environment specifically? And I haven't really talked about specifically to the workplace environment, so let's talk about that. I think the issue is this person a prickly person in a certain context, or just with respect to like one teammate or one boss or whatever? Do they just have a problem with an individual or a specific type of individual? Or do they have kind of a problem with everybody? And by the way, it's not does everybody have a problem with them, because there could be complex reasons for that. Maybe the way they treat one person is the reason everybody doesn't like them, because everybody else sees that and they don't like that, right? But you fix the dynamic with the one person, then everybody else kind of follows, gets in line, because their issue with the cactus or the scorpion person really is indirect. It's not a direct issue with them. So if you're a leader and you've got a team that you're leading, and you're struggling because you've got a cactus person or you've got a scorpion person on your team, um, how do you identify them? I think you probably need to look at the interpersonal dynamics really closely and analyze, like what's going on. And I don't know that you can always do that in a way that's clinical, like a clinical observation outside of, a direct interaction with the person themselves, the grumpy person, the prickly person, the stinger. You need to get close to the needles yourself. Now, I wouldn't throw yourself onto them. I wouldn't try to get myself stung. That's going to be counterproductive. Instead, have a listening session. Bring that person in and say, ask them some questions. You don't really need to make a lot of declarative statements or imperative statements. Remember going back to the early days of your English classes as a school child. You learned about the different types of sentences. Declarative sentences end with a period. It's where you're stating something, you're observing something. Imperative sentences are commands. You must, you should, whatever, you will do these things. Interrogative sentences are questions. And I would stray away from rhetorical questions, because those aren't really true interrogative sentences. Those are really declarative statements that you're making. You're just making it look like it's an interrogative. So keep it simple. If you're going to ask a question, Wait for the answer. Don't ask a question unless you want the answer, and wait for the answer. And ask this person some good questions. Have you noticed that there is a there seems to be some difficulty between this person and the other person? Why do you think that is? What is it that makes this a challenge for you interacting with this person, or in this context with this kind of person? You know, you're on the sales team. Why do you feel like customers are stupid? Well, you're on the marketing team. Why do you hate interacting with vendors? You know, um, you're you're in HR, but you seem to have a very adversarial relationship with employee, like all the employees. What's And instead of saying like, "What is wrong with you?" say, "Why do you think that is? Do you understand this? This is part of your job to get this result, but instead we've noticed that you're instead getting this result, or this is the effect that's happening here." Surface that with them through questions. Kind of take the Socratic method. Um, I think managing a cactus person. One of the other questions was, what strategies can I implement to effectively manage a cacti person or a cactus person in a leadership role? And then also the same question for scorpions, like how do I approach conflict resolution when I'm dealing with a scorpion personality in your team? With a cactus person, you've got to get down to the issue with them, like the defense mechanism with them. Like um, what is it that they are being triggered by that's causing them to respond in a prickly way? Kind of the same thing with the scorpion person, but in a more redirected way. I'm sorry, in a more direct way. So for them, a lot of the stinging is intentional toward it, like it's reacting to one specific thing. It's not broad spectrum, and so you have to get to the trigger there. Like, what makes you feel reactive? What makes you feel like you have to lash out or react or respond in this particular context or in this particular way? I wish I had more questions in the chat. I wish I had more people who were like live and asking me questions in the chat, but I did have these couple of questions that were submitted, sort of before the session got started through our process. Um, and it was pretty much, how do I figure out, do I have this kind of a person on my team, or if I notice a person like this, how do I distinguish them from being kind of I don't want to say broad spectrum, like damaged and just kind of always like this in a certain context, um, versus someone who's doing it intentionally to another person. And then like, how do I deal with that person? Um, and those are the two questions. So the cactus person, in the book, I go down, I have like 5 characteristics of a cactus and 4 characteristics of a scorpion. Might be useful to write a blog article about that, but um, because I have not a lot of time in this session, I just want to say uh, cacti and scorpions both involve discomfort, and the key difference lies in your response. I think with the cacti, the aim is to establish boundaries and foster self care while remaining open to and eager for healing, forgiveness, reconciliation, whenever that becomes possible, and understanding that that'll only be possible when they accept their need for that and they come back on their own to try to foster and facilitate that. I mean, if you see a glimmer of hope, you can rush out to them and try to create that opportunity, and there might be some false starts there with some people. It's not always as clear cut as the prodigal son, but don't get discouraged. And then with the scorpions, the focus is on endurance and growth and commitment to purpose beyond your own immediate comfort. With the scorpion, you have to simply scoop them out of the river and set them on the bank very gently, over and over and over. You have to endure the sting. You have to love them anyway. And that might be the case with a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, someone who, by their nature, they're harming you, but it's the nature of your relationship to them. God put them in your life, right? Or you made a vow before God be to have them in your life and in that context, in that relationship context forever, for life, right? And so you just have to endure it sacrificially. You have to love them sacrificially. That isn't an answer that most people in the world today like, because they see suffering as evil and pleasure as good, and it's not as simple as that. Suffering builds character, and suffering produces holiness over time. And in a work context, there may be like a boss that's a scorpion. You can't change the dynamic. You can't make the boss change. You don't have the power in the relationship, and you can't quit your job either because you have other responsibilities you still need to earn the living. So you keep showing up, and you just have to love them through it. You have to, take one for the team, as it were. Um, I did have a question about, can these people ever be good, and how can this be kind of positive? But unfortunately, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to respond to that question individually off the screen. We do have a lot of time for Q&A in these sessions. It's not always like a big long monologue, and there's a lot more information and a robust resource in my book. So if you want to get a copy of Lead Again, a modern guide for resilience, or a modern guide to resilience, um, go grab it, go pre-order it. It's available at the end of the month. It'll be shipping out at the end of the month. I still have, I think, 3 copies of Lead Again. I think I have 3 copies of this that I ordered that were kind of like proof copies. It's the initial print run of Lead Again. And I'm signing them, I'm autographing them, sending them out. And so you can get an autographed copy of the original print run, first print run of Lead Again. Charges only like $35. It's the same cost as ordering it on Amazon. If you want one of those, just reach out to me in a direct message on LinkedIn or by email or something like that. I will, try to keep them in stock for me to send autographed copies out on request. Um, but I may not always be able to keep them in stock like that. The best way probably to guarantee that you get your copy and you get it quickly and all of that is to order it on Amazon. And, of course, I'll be doing events. There's an event in March at the Clarksville Montgomery County Public Library in Clarksville, Tennessee, my hometown. And they have like a local authors event, and I'll be doing a book signing there. I'm going to try to have a stack of copies that I can, sign for people and stuff. I got a notice early this week, that the local library is gonna carry Lead Again in stock on its shelves, and for your hometown library to be carrying your book, good. And I've been talking to other bookstores in Nashville, like Parnassus and the bookshop in East Nashville, about doing some signings and events. So as that develops, I'll keep you in the loop here and on social media. So be sure to follow me on the various channels where this is broadcasting: YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. We'll be here every week. So, and I also have the capacity to bring people in, like on screen, one on one, and we can chat or talk. I can do that either through Zoom, or I can give you a restream link that you can use to join the stream. And I think that would be great. Unfortunately, a lot of the attendance seems to be on the replays, and that may just be a timing thing. I don't know. Maybe I should be doing this in the evenings or something, like a Tuesday evening instead of Thursday morning, so people can do it after work or whatever. I just hate to encroach on people's family time. So it's time. No matter what time of the day you pick or what day of the week you pick, there's always going to be a subset of your audience that has scheduling conflicts. But I would like to get this to be a little more interactive, to have a little more live Q&A, even if that was just in the LinkedIn event, just people live in there dropping comments. If you join the event on LinkedIn, you can leave comments, and I see them live, and I can answer them there. You can put your question in right there. And of course, if you want it to be more anonymous, we can do that as well. About 5 minutes over today. Ran a little long. Made it a little more personal and holistic than strictly professional, but hopefully still very useful for you all. I think the book likewise is a really helpful resource, a very useful resource, and I do see a chat message from LinkedIn here where one participant said good morning at 10:54. For whatever reason, that wasn't showing up in the LinkedIn chat. Maybe it was a comment um, to the LinkedIn event. Huh. It's interesting. I'm still navigating the yeah. Oh, no, it's not there, and it's not in the chat either. But it showed up on the restream in the studio. So I have a cousin from Illinois who actually joined the stream, Christopher Singleton. He's a great guy, and thanks for attending, Chris, and thank you to everyone else who, while you may not have caught it live, is on the replay. I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you got a lot out of it. Sorry we're 5 minutes over, and we will see you next.